Hello guys, welcome to this video. The idea of this video is to explain a document that I've made. This document is just a guidance. It provides advice in how to make CAD basically. It's a bit generic. I'm gonna be improving the document as I go. But this is just the initial version, okay? To start, I just want to clarify, I just want to explain the different types of CAD files. The first one, and probably one of the, if not the most common one, it's a 3DM file. 3DM file, it's the extension of a Rhino file. Rhino from Rhinoceros. Basically, Rhino uses surfaces, solids, and curves to create objects. This file can be Boolean or not Boolean. If it's not Boolean, it basically means that it has different objects. Like in this case, the shank would be an object, the prongs would be another object, the halo would be another object. Of course, the stones is just for reference, okay? So if the file is not Boolean, it means that it can be edited much easier than if it's Boolean. If it's Boolean, the prongs would be joined together with the shank and all in parts, okay? I mean, the halo would be another part in this case, the prongs might be another part. That's a different thing. That's entirely up to you how you would separate the file in terms of production. But the 3DM could be all together or could be separate in many parts, okay? Then we have an STL file, which is the file that is commonly used for 3D printing. Actually, you could also use the SLC file, but still STL file is up to now the most common one for 3D printing. The STL file, it's a mesh, so once you open it, you will see that it's full of triangles, not like this. Because it's a mesh, it cannot be edited easily. It can be scaled up, you could do some basic transformations, but because it's a mesh, it would not allow you to modify that file easily. Then we have a mesh geometry inside a 3DM file. That basically means that this file that we're seeing on the screen now, it's not curves, surfaces, or solids, it's a mesh. If we open Rhino and we import an STL file, we will also see it like this. But it's possible to save a 3DM file as a mesh with a mesh inside, basically. So the geometry is a mesh. It's not native Rhino geometry. It basically means that we cannot edit that geometry either, because still it's a mesh. Okay. A file it's only easy to edit when it's Rhino geometry, and ideally not Boolean. Could be the case that, for example, if we 3D scan something like another ring or a gemstone using a 3D scanner, the result of that 3D scanning is going to be a mesh. But then if we're going to create something with that mesh, we would need to import that mesh into Rhino or any software that you're using, and then create the geometry for that. So then we would have a 3D scan object, which is a mesh, inside the Rhino file, and we can save that as a 3DM. Then we have OBJ, that it's mostly used for organic modeling, and other industries as well, they use it for other things. But when it comes to jewelry, one of the most common ways that we see this is when it comes to organic modeling in zebras, for example. So in this case, what I did was create the basic geometry in Rhino, save it as an OBJ, put it into ZBrush, do these organic shapes on the sides and on the top, and then save it. So basically OBJ is the file that we would use if we want to play with ZBrush a little bit. And of course we could also use ZBrush to make geometry, and then we would save with the native ZBrush extension. Right, when it comes to modeling more in a traditional way in Rhino geometry, well, Rhino Geometry or whatever software really. These are the thicknesses that I would usually work with. Again, all this document just provides a guidance. Doesn't mean that it has to be like this, but it's just to help people who are starting in all of this, because we've noticed that especially coming from certain academic backgrounds, sometimes the thicknesses tend to be too thin. So this just provides like a basic guidance, okay? In this case, for example, the bridge, this would be the bridge of the ring. I usually made it like 0.9 or 1 mil, but I've noticed that some people, they tend to make it quite thick, like at least 1.2, 1.5. Personally, I prefer to make it thinner. It's strong enough, so it would work well, and it doesn't need to be thicker than this. And in my opinion, it looks nicer. The width of the shank, I would say roughly around 2 millimeters. 1.5, I would consider it acceptable. You just have to be careful not to make the ring very flimsy, very thin. So if a ring is like 1.2 maybe, of course depending on the geometry, depending on the overall look of the ring, but in my opinion 1.2 would already be too thin, especially if we're gonna set stones on the shoulders. The setting and the holes for the stones will make the geometry weaker, will make it more delicate, so I would advise you not to do that. In terms of maximum, it's entirely up to you. It really depends on the design. The way I see it, if it's wider than 10 millimeters, it's going to be very difficult to wear. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it's possible. Then basic collets. It's really important. The thickness on the collet could be changed. A lot of people tend to make either completely solid, or they tend to make the bottom one thicker than the top one. It doesn't really matter. What it really matters is this one, that from the end of the stone, from the collet to the finger rail, should be at least 0.8. Okay. Also, on the very top here, I usually do it like this. And also, this is quite important when looking at the top of the collet. In this case I made an oval, but it works with any gem cuts. The bezel should be scaled up like 3% maybe. So I just allow a little bit more. That is just because when you are cleaning up the ring and polishing, it will go, this metal was going to be removed. So we need to take that into consideration. If we don't do that, we could end up with a bezel that is smaller than the stone, so that sometimes could look a bit bad. Also, all of this document, it's generic in terms of, in the sense that I'm not specifying in which metal I'm doing it. It could vary. Silver is softer than gold, so that's something that should be taken into consideration as well. Okay, when it comes to claws, for some reason a lot of people tend to put the claws very inside the stone. You don't need that much. Actually, you shouldn't do that. Something like this, like the top, it's enough, because if we bring it down, we bring it into the stone, once we are setting it, the claw will have a little bump here on the side. That's because when the setter is gonna bend this part, the top of the claw, onto the stone, it will have a little, it should be more outside. If you allow for the claw to be farther out, you will avoid this little bump on the side. And it's really difficult to repair something like that. So most of the cases, if you already bring the claw in, you might need to repair the whole job to remake it all. And in terms of length, always allow for the claws to be pass beyond the top crown of the stone. Okay. Some setters would ask you to do it a bit longer. Again, this is really up to your manufacturing procedures. Okay, these are some basic guidance in terms of this setting style that I call pronged surface. I will probably add another picture showing the front of the ring, but basically the girdle sits above the band. Okay. And again, we're allowing a bit of metal on the sides. to allow for polishing, cleanup and polishing. These are the minimum diameters that I would use for the prongs. This power set, well, these are the dimensions that I would always consider. The most important one is this 0.5 here. Okay, 0.5, even 0.8 is fine. Between 0.5 and 0.8, I would say. Channel set. Again, all of this you can just use it as a reference. This diagram represents for stones up to 1.8. This one between 1.8 and 2.5 mil, and this for whatever it's above 2.5. When it comes to the profile of the band, you pretty much can do whatever you want, but try to avoid this as much as possible. You need to allow metal on the top for the setter. So if you have something very sharp, basically the setter will have no metal to set the stones. So as you can see, this is quite similar. This is more flat on the top, but still it would not be thick enough. Okay. Gypsy set, also known as flash setting. Basically it's when the stone looks like completely under the metal, like covered in metal all around. Always, whatever size you are using, at least you should allow 0.35 between the stones. However, when it comes to playing with different sizes, you should increase that, because otherwise the setter is gonna struggle a little bit. So again, these are like a rough guidelines in terms of sizes. And when it comes to pivot holes in any kind of setting, the hole should be at least 0.8. Okay, 0.6 maybe I would consider that acceptable, but it also depends on your casting. I would also try not to make it much bigger than this, but again, depends on your casting and the metal that you're using. I might add another slide here. Big stones. These are the stones that you see on the front of the ring, well, front and back usually. Something like the first image, I would consider that acceptable. It's fine, even if it goes inside the finger rail slightly. It is quite common to put it higher, like the one on the right, but in my opinion, the one on the left looks nicer. So there's a bit of a sacrifice in terms of ergonomics that would happen here. So the big stone is like inside the finger rail. You would feel it when you're wearing the ring. So still you can wear the ring and it's fine, but if you want to make sure that your customer doesn't feel that, just bring it up a little bit, like 0.3 is enough. Okay. And this is a bit of a guidance, the 0.9. Of course it would depend on the depth of the stones, but I would usually make it that it comes up a little bit. It's technically possible to do more, so you can make this 1.2 if you want, but visually this is the look that I like, so just a little bit up, just a little bit outside. Okay. When it comes to making things hollow, 0.8 wall thickness always. Less than this, it's just not gonna work. If you're using gemstones, so imagine that you're gonna set this would change. So if I was to make this ring full of stones, I would make it thicker. Okay, it would all depend on the size of the stones. Then recess areas, or areas going up. These are the guidelines that I would follow. Again, it would varies a little bit depending on which text and which font you're using. When using fonts, I would always advise you not to trust the font. So just so that you know, fonts are based on Windows, they are not based on Jewellery. So most of the font that you will find, you will need to get those curves, those solids, and make sure that it can be made. Okay. Some people tend to think that you put the text and that's it, it's a text. No, a text is geometry. Geometry can be wrong. Okay. Okay, that was pretty much everything so far. I'm gonna be adding more content soon. In the meantime, if you guys have any questions, any concerns, anything that you want me to add on the document, please let me know and I'll try to do it as soon as possible. Thank you so much.